Hello everyone, welcome to version 1.2 of my Resident Evil 2 Remake, Hardcore difficulty, Claire 2 scenario, no damage, knife only, S+, no audio walkthrough. This will cover the entire scenario in one single video, and this was a piece of cake. Compared to how long it took to record Leon 2, this scenario probably took no more than 2 hours to record because it's very simple, and Claire has it easy compared to Leon in this game. She not only gains access to more knives compared to Leon, but she also deals with far less annoying enemies, and her sections aren't prone to so much RNG because of the way the enemy arrangements are. So given these factors, and also the fact that I did version 1.2 of my Claire 1 and Leon 2 walkthroughs, and Claire 2 really isn't that different to these scenarios, there's not much to really discuss about this particular scenario. The only thing I can really discuss right now that's related to Claire's campaign is G4 Birkin, because I actually found a better strategy for dealing with G4 Birkin that actually utilizes knowledge from Resident Evil Village, specifically from Moreau's boss fight. But before I get into that, let me talk about this real quick, because this is one of the moments where Mr. X can be a real hassle in the second scenario, because on this recording, even though the shelf got knocked over and it's preventing Mr. X from actually getting into this room that I'm in right now, for some unknown reason, Mr. X decided to stay in the library longer than necessary, so he's right there. And also, this female zombie got teleported onto the stairs, or she decided to go on the staircase. I don't know why she's there, but now I have to deal with Mr. X by just constantly looping his attacks and waiting for just the right moment where I can actually get past this female zombie. And the way I always bait out Mr. X's attacks is I always walk towards him, because Mr. X and the other enemies recognize your hitbox early if you're walking into them. If you're not walking into them, they'll get very close to you and then they'll do the attack, which is not what you want. And luckily for me, the female zombie gave me an opening, so I've gotten past her, I've gotten past Mr. X, I've gotten the medallions, and now we're going to be able to take on G1 Birkin. Yeah, this is definitely one of the moments where the second scenario can be incredibly random because of Mr. X. And because that female zombie isn't in the room where the unicorn medallion is, she's going to be a random variable to consider when I get back to the library later on. And also, you might have noticed that Marvin was closing in on me. This is why I mentioned in my Leon 2 walkthrough that you need to have Marvin and that other zombie down on the bottom level so that they don't cut you off when you're trying to get to the secret passage. And I did make sure to get them down on the bottom level in this recording. It's just this time Marvin was a bit closer than I was expecting, but I was still able to get past him. If I didn't try to get them down on the bottom level, he would have surely caught me. But getting back to what I was discussing earlier about my strategy against G4 Birkin and using the knowledge from Resident Evil Village, specifically from Moreau's boss fight, the strategy involves using an exploit that forces G4 Birkin to taunt, and it works in pretty much the same sort of way as Moreau, because in Resident Evil Village, when you're dealing with Moreau, there's a way to force Moreau to taunt by tricking the game into thinking he's damaged you. Because Moreau is programmed to taunt every single time he makes you flinch regardless of damage, and the way you get him to do this is you bait out his close range attack, and then as soon as he does it, you run past him and touch his tail, because during the recovery period of that attack, if you touch his tail, it will always make you flinch, and this will cause Moreau to taunt, and when he taunts, his weak spot is exposed, which can allow you to dump his weak spot with mines, and the mines do an incredible amount of damage against him. With G4 Birkin, it's pretty much the same thing, where he's programmed to taunt every single time he makes you flinch regardless of damage, and there's only one specific move that G4 Birkin does that can make you flinch but not damage you, and it's the move where he climbs onto the wall, then jumps onto the train, then jumps onto you. And it doesn't work with the other move where he climbs onto the wall and then immediately tries to jump for you. I don't know why it's only with the move where he jumps onto the train and then he jumps onto you, but regardless, if you get close to G4 Birkin slightly after he finishes his jump attack when he jumps from the train, it will make you flinch, it will then cause him to taunt, and you'll be able to hit his eyeballs very easily before he resumes his attack. It's the most effective way to deal with G4 Birkin, and it's so interesting how Resident Evil 2 Remake introduced this system, and it persisted into Resident Evil Village, but I don't know if Resident Evil 3 Remake had this system, and even if it does have this system, it's pretty pointless because the general strategies against the bosses, they work pretty well, and the bosses in Resident Evil 3 Remake are really well designed, aside from the final boss fight. Resident Evil 4 Remake, I think it has this system, but very rarely are there ever going to be attacks that make you flinch, but not damage you in the process. Well, so right there, I knifed that dog because it's actually programmed to bark at the fence before it attacks you, and I was trying to get rid of that dog because I was trying to stop the whole moment where a dog would just camp by the bus and try to hit me as I was getting out of the bus, but it didn't really do much because that's not the dog that actually camps by the bus. but right there, for some reason he moved, and you saw him briefly camping by the bus. I don't know why he moved, but thank God for that. And that's all I can say about Claire 2 right now, because the rest of Claire 2 is pretty similar to Leon 2, and I already covered Leon 2 in my previous walkthrough, so I'll just move on to other tangents. One thing I want to talk about is this game that I've been so heavily invested in ever since I did a blind playthrough of it, and it's Hi-Fi Rush. Hi-Fi Rush, which was the most recent game made by Tango Gameworks 2 years ago, has to be one of the greatest games ever made in gaming history by far. It has such a unique vibe with it, and its concept of using rhythm and music in order to inform its combat and world design is so original for a game. And I know there have been like previous rhythm games before, but they've always been so limited and never AAA like Hi-Fi Rush is. Hi-Fi Rush really stands out among all other action games, and every single time I play this game, I just feel alive. Hi-Fi Rush is a genuine feel-good experience that is so wholesome and so fun with everything that it does. It has such great comedy, it has great characters, it has a really interesting story. I mean, not like a complex story. I mean, it's a very simple story of taking down these executives who are trying to use an AI system built into robot parts to control the minds of individuals. Not to take over the world, but to sell more products. It's meant to eliminate consumerism, basically, and it's a very funny idea for a story, and it also helps that the game has some really great voice actors. Like, Roger Craig Smith is actually the voice actor for the main villain of the game. His name is Kale, and also Chai, the main character you play as, he's voiced by the same actor who plays Spider-Man in the Marvel Spider-Man 2017 TV series. As for the other voice actors, I don't know if they're actually popular, but they're also really good with their delivery of their dialogue. Like, the writing is just superb, and the acting is also great in Hi-Fi Rush. I just can't believe a game that was started by 2 people originally became the kind of sensation that it is. Like, Hi-Fi Rush has such AAA quality in everything that it does. It deserves all the overwhelming praise it has received. And what I mentioned before about the music being such a central focus in Hi-Fi Rush, it's not just like playing in the background, it's also something that directly influences the gameplay and even the cutscenes. Like, characters will literally do actions that sync up with the beat of the music that's playing right now. And during gameplay, when you press buttons like your attack button or your dodge button or your parry button to the beat, you actually get bonuses applied to yourself that actually improve the gameplay. And also, the enemies attack you on the beat, so all their attacks are synced up with the music. So the music serves as this subtle cue to let you know what's going to happen or when you're supposed to do certain actions. It's such a cool idea, and the entire gameplay loop of Hi-Fi Rush is all about expression. It's all about creativity. Like, there are so many ways of actually playing Hi-Fi Rush, and it helps that the game has such a large roster of moves that you can do, not just with basic moves, but also with like special attacks, partner attacks. Every playthrough of Hi-Fi Rush, whether it's the story, the rhythm tower, or the arcade mode, it always feels like you're doing something different. It always feels like you're using different moves in a different sequence. And because of this, the gameplay loop never gets old. It always feels very refreshing just coming back to Hi-Fi Rush. And one of the things about Hi-Fi Rush that aids this process is the fact that it's not some stupid RPG clone, it's not some stupid Souls clone, it's a traditional action game. It actually puts the action elements at the forefront rather than any like stupid level system or RPG systems. Like, all those stupid systems are just so prevalent in games nowadays. Like, Hi-Fi Rush is such a breath of fresh air in this games industry that is just oversaturated by such trendy and stupid genres. Like what I mentioned with your RPG clones, your Souls clones, your live service games, your stupid online games. It's just something different for a change. And the fact that it's made by Tango Gameworks, one of my favorite game developers of all time, makes this game even more profound with its impact on me. That might honestly be one of the reasons why Hi-Fi Rush stands out from other fighting games or other action games in my mind, just because of the fact that it's made by Tango Gameworks. I honestly feel like doing a walkthrough of Hi-Fi Rush on Rhythm Master difficulty, potentially doing no damage or maybe even an S rank walkthrough, just to really showcase how great this game is. Because as of right now, nothing in the games industry is really impressing me, and we've barely gotten any news regarding Resident Evil 9. The only kind of official news we've gotten regarding Resident Evil 9 is that it's apparently the most ambitious Resident Evil title ever. It's had the longest development time compared to other Resident Evil titles, and apparently it's being directed by the director of Resident Evil 7, which is really cool, but at the same time, Anpo-san directed Resident Evil 4 Remake, and he was the director of Resident Evil 5, one of the greatest Resident Evil titles ever made. So because we have this situation where a great director ultimately fell from grace when he decided to direct this completely butchered version of Resident Evil 4, I have to open Resident Evil 9 up to that possibility as as well, where the director of Resident Evil 7 might fall from grace. And I know that the director isn't responsible for every single part of the game, but ultimately he's the one that you think of when it comes to the success or failings of a game. And if Resident Evil 9 follows that same lacking quality as Resident Evil 4 Remake, I'm going to subconsciously think of the director every single time I think of Resident Evil 9 if it's bad. But moving on to other official news regarding Resident Evil 9, there was a video that new Capcom released where they were commemorating the success of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and at the end of this video, there was that signpost that had the Roman numerals for 9, and what does that even mean? Why would you make that the teaser for Resident Evil 9? What significance does that signpost have to what Resident Evil 9 is going to be? And there's been a lot of mixed news regarding Resident Evil 9. There was one news outlet that was saying that Resident Evil 9 was taking place in Singapore. There was another one that mentioned it would focus on Evelyn's origins, and there was another one that mentioned that Leon and Jill would apparently be the main characters and they would be infected by the mutamycete, and Rose would actually be a character in this game because her blood would apparently be used to cure Leon and Jill of the mutamycete. But I just don't think that's true. I mean, if it's going to be taking place in a location like Singapore, that'd be very interesting because it's always really cool when the Resident Evil games go to these different locations around the world. The setting of Romania was one of the most interesting locations they chose for Resident Evil Village, and to have a character like Ethan Winters, just your typical American citizen with no fighting experience, going to a location that foreign was one of the most interesting subversion of expectations I've ever experienced with a Resident Evil title. And I remember in one of my Resident Evil 2 Remake walkthroughs talking about the Resident Evil Village leaks and how it mentioned that Ethan would be in some kind of snowy mountain setting. And when I was doing the commentary, I mentioned that it just didn't sound right, and it just sounded kind of weird that Ethan would go to a location like this. But then it ultimately turned out to be true when they released the first trailer for Resident Evil Village, and it was just so awesome. It was such a great feeling I had within me when I just saw that trailer, and what I heard in those leaks turned out to be true. And one of the other foreign settings I like in the Resident Evil series was Russia, because Russia has been featured in at least 3 different Resident Evil media. We saw Russia in Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, Resident Evil Revelations 2, and Resident Evil Damnation. In fact, what was so interesting about Resident Evil Revelations 2 is that there's a moment when you're playing as Claire where you hear a radio, and it's actually talking about Svetlana, because Resident Evil Revelations 2 with Claire's section, it takes place before the events of Resident Evil Damnation. Claire's section takes place in January of 2011, and Resident Evil Damnation takes place in February of 2011, so Claire's section is 1 month before the events of Resident Evil Damnation. But it's so cool how they decided to reference Resident Evil Damnation in Resident Evil Revelations 2, and Resident Evil Damnation is an animated movie, and normally they don't reference the animated movies in their games, but Resident Evil Revelations 2 is the biggest exception in this case. In fact, it not only references Resident Evil Damnation, but it also references Resident Evil 6 because of the ending cutscene that plays, where Claire is talking with Piers after Piers found Chris in that bar. And Resident Evil Damnation does the same with referencing Resident Evil 6 because in the credits scene, we see scenes from Resident Evil 6 playing out. That level of interconnectivity between Resident Evil Revelations 2, Resident Evil Damnation, and Resident Evil 6 is really cool. I mean, it's not the first time the series has done this. There have been plenty of other Resident Evil titles that have referenced other titles and also tied in directly to the events of the previous games. But it's so cool how Revelations 2 references the animated movie and also references Resident Evil 6. And I think the last time a single Resident Evil title referenced many of the past games was Resident Evil 7, because it references the classic trilogy with the memorial dedicated to the Raccoon City incident. It referenced Resident Evil 6 with the aftermath of the Edonia incident. It referenced Resident Evil Outbreak with Alyssa Ashcroft. And it referenced Resident Evil Revelations 1 with the book from Clive R. O'Brien, former head of the BSAA, titled The Unveiled Abyss. And the fact that Resident Evil 7 referenced those side games was really cool. That's as cool as Resident Evil Revelations 2 referencing Resident Evil Damnation with that radio that Claire hears. But getting back to what I was talking about regarding Russia as a setting, it makes sense to do that in a series based on bioterrorism, because bioterrorism is a political issue as well, and Russia is a major political country. One of the things that is quite intriguing about the Resident Evil series is when it uses the political space to add more context to the threat of BOWs in certain media. Like with how Resident Evil Damnation does it with Svetlana's presidential influence in the Eastern Slav Republic, and how she staged an attack from the rebels to make it seem like they were using BOWs in order to get enough attention to make the Eastern Slav Republic an EU nation. And another use of this political space is the US government's involvement with Umbrella in the production of BOWs, the Umbrella trials, and also with Adam Benford trying to hold the US government accountable for its involvement in the Raccoon City incident and the global threat of BOWs. And the way they expand upon on that story point in multiple Resident Evil titles is really cool. And I think new Capcom is still trying to focus on this political aspect to a certain extent, because in the most recent ARMS magazine that released right around the time of Resident Evil 4 Remake, they expanded upon certain details from the canon timeline, namely with the DSO and also with Adam Benford. They mentioned that Adam Benford was the CIA director around 2002, and that the DSO was celebrating its 10th anniversary since 2011, and it also reports to the White House. I mean, it's not the biggest of details, but the fact that they're even mentioning the DSO in this ARMS magazine is interesting and speaks to a potential use of the DSO in a later Resident Evil title and maybe the use of the political space. But it's interesting that it's the 10th anniversary with it being 2021, because we know by 2021 the BSAA is now a rotten, ruined organization. So it must be a strange position for the DSO to be in when the world's leading counter-bioterrorist organization is now a rotten, ruined organization. And we still don't know if the BSAA's corruption is due to Blue Umbrella's influence, or if the BSAA's corruption is due to something internal, because we know the BSAA has had moles in the past, like with Jessica from Revelations 1 and also with M. Suzuki from Resident Evil 5. But I just hope they mention this corruption in Resident Evil 9, and hopefully Blue Umbrella will feature in Resident Evil 9 as well, because I think it's a very interesting idea to have the BSAA now be corrupt and also with Blue Umbrella returning, because we know they were mentioned in Resident Evil 4 first. But hopefully new Capcom doesn't just ignore this story point in Resident Evil 9 when it releases. But that has been my walkthrough of Claire 2. Stay tuned for the future videos. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.